Hello, it is Sunday, um, December 1st. Wow, December already. So this is part two of my read through of 3D Workers Island. I'll just very quickly summarize where we last left off. So we've seen a couple scenes at this point of a screensaver that has questionable origins and the setup is quite similar to a creepypasta. No one seems to know quite where this screensaver came from, and there is a website and corresponding forum that is dedicated to uh, discussing this screensaver. People have different opinions about it. We are just starting to get immersed in what exactly is going on here. Um, a few notes from my last read through of the first few slides here. I took note of the fact that PLawler says they may even confound you and anger you at times, referring to the characters in the screensaver. So that's interesting. In hindsight, when PLawler says later that in particular, the character Amber frustrates her at times because Amber is, uh, you know, uh, P. Lawler is perceiving this character Amber as not doing anything, kind of just lazing about. Yeah. Uh, Even though in the slides we see Amber mowing the lawn, so Um, it doesn't quite conform to our empirical evidence of what's going on in the screensaver. Of course, we don't really know whose instance of this screensaver we're watching, but I mean, it's interesting to note that there are similarities between things that P. Lawler says and certain occurrences that occur in the screensaver. So it's entirely possible we're watching Pat Lawler's instance of the screensaver. It's difficult to say. Um, if you're not following along, maybe I would consider watching this in order. If you are just joining us now, I would go back and watch the first one. Um, but okay, this other thing I wanted to note that I wrote down is the name Pat Lawler makes sense considering that P. Lawler is the website administrator, and so there is Pat lays down the law, right? Um, so I think there is something going on with the name. Um, there will be, spoiler alert, but there will be points in the story where uh, Pat Lawler deletes somebody's post because they said something that is not allowed on the forum. So Pat lays down the law, P. Lawler. Um, the other thing I wanted to note from part one when we were doing the read through, there is a user on the forum named MawGirl, and so MawGirl is curious about the screensaver and wants to explore it more, but her brother needs the computer for work. Now later on, that seems like a relatively innocuous detail, right? But um, with a work like this, especially considering how Petscop played out, sometimes relatively small details um, were significant in some way. I'm not saying it's significant to the plot per se, but it could be thematically important because there's such a huge parallel, not parallel. There's such a huge contrast here between uh, Pat Lawler, this character Pat Lawler, who is like the website owner and administrator and has complete authoritative control over what you're allowed to say on the forum. Um, there, there's a contrast here because Pat Lawler is set up to be like an immensely privileged individual in the story. Um, so, for example, right here, right where we left off, we see this is an overview of the screensaver, and Pat Lawler wrote this ostensibly. So one thing one thing Pat divulges is that Pat is a retired person, and so they have a lot of time to watch this screensaver. They have a lot of and Pat is also kind of there's a lot of implications that Pat is like immensely privileged in certain ways. So, for example, uh, Pat notes here, um, I have been running 3D Whisker uh, on the desk in my study, in my bedroom, in my living room, my kitchen, and my basement, all running around the clock as I do my household tasks and live my life. Okay, so that's 5 PCs in the late 90s. I said before that I wasn't entirely sure how much that would cost in the late 90s. Well, I looked it up, and like it's a bit tricky because we have to make some assumptions about what type of PCs these are exactly. But if we're just assuming they are anywhere from like semi decent to high performing PCs, um, and Pat Lawler has 5 of them. If they're 5 at least halfway decent PCs, um, anywhere from like mid range to high performance, that could be like in today's dollars, that could be like $15,000 worth of technical equipment right there. So this person has a lot of disposable income, is what I'm saying, and they also have a lot of free time, which is which puts them in a position that is quite unique. Not many people are in that position. So I'm not just like pointing this out to say like, oh, this person is privileged, it's more so a structure. It's a point about the structure of class society, and um, it's worth noting because not only does this person have an immense amount of free time, an immense amount of wealth to use, a lot of money, in other words, to spend on um, things like a computer at a time when, in the late 90s, at least in my experience, um, it would have been relatively normal for a middle class family to have at least one PC. In my household, I would consider us middle class. Um, in my household, we had one PC, and I monopolized it a lot of the time. I remember when we finally got cable internet, and that kind of just blew my mind. But the point is, a person who had 5 computers in the late 90s, I would have perceived as like, holy shit, this person is rich as fuck. Um, so, but it's a structural point about class society. This person has a lot of free time, a lot of disposable income, and uh, is the owner and proprietor of this website that controls the discourse about the screensaver. And they seem to want to sanitize it. They seem to want to um, disallow any discussion of this screensaver that might kind of go in a direction that is nasty. It might that is like perhaps would be considered unseemly by uh, you know by proper standards. I kind of get the sense that this person is like conservative minded in certain ways, and I guess I'll stop droning on, and we can kind of continue at this point. I think I've provided enough um, provided enough context so that we can continue here. But um, right, okay. The other thing is in a previous scene, uh, the character Pat in the screensaver, there is a scene where they just sort of twirl around and then walk back towards the house, which indicates to me a kind of carefree mentality, um, which kind of corresponds to this character Pat Lawler. You know, this person who's retired, they're relaxing, they're just kind of pursuing their interests. Um, they seem kind of carefree in certain ways, but also, you know, there's this other, there's this flip side to Pat Lawler where we will see what we'll see how that plays out. I think I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So okay, um, we'll just go ahead and read some of this here. I know I read it last time, but whatever is happening under the hood, it is taxing to any PC. The program seems to be fluid in this way. It will use whatever resources are provided to it, but it can make do with just about any system that is capable of displaying the 3D graphics. Impressive or not as a technology, you will find that this is a program of broad and infinite possibilities. Since retiring last November, I have been keeping 3D Whisker running on the desk in my study, in my bedroom, my living room, my kitchen, and my basement, all running around the clock as I do my household tasks and live my life. What I see on each of these PCs throughout the day is continuously fresh and novel to me. It makes my home into a very pleasant little world. You will notice that the island is quiet. 3D Whisker does not play audio, unlike what you may find in the After Dark products and similar entertainment-based programs, but very much in line with the default package of screensavers in the Windows operating systems such as 3D Maze and Mystify Your Mind. The significance of this silence is considerable. It allows the island to disappear. Despite its heft, it's also light. There is a there is a sense of ghostly transience that none of it is really happening, and it can all vanish with the flick of a mouse. I find that that last line is pretty interesting. Um, there is a sense of ghostly transience that none of it is really happening, and it can all vanish with the flick of a mouse. Okay, so Pat Lawler this is Pat Lawler's description. Keep that in mind. So there is a strong indication that Pat Lawler is an unreliable narrator. Um, and that's all I'll say at this point. So we have another scene here. If you will recall that this character in the pink shirt is Amber. This other character in the blue shirt is Holland. Um, Holland is strongly coded as a very young individual, um, probably a toddler. We see them playing with, excuse me, I burped. Sorry. Um, we see them, we see Holland kind of like playing with a doll and um, strongly indicated that they are very young. So Amber seems to be a bit older. Amber was mowing the lawn. So that would be a good indication that Amber is, at the very least, old enough to mow the lawn. I don't know what's appropriate. What's the appropriate age for? I think I started mowing the lawn when I was like 11 or 12. I want to say, but so she might be older than that. It's hard, who can say really. Um, we also are just we could just be projecting our own. I could just be projecting my own preconceptions onto the screensaver. I think that is uh, kind of the uh, metatextual component of this work is that the entire thing could be perceived as completely arbitrary, like because there's really you don't really get a whole lot from the screensaver, from the scenes of the screensaver. So it could be that we're all just projecting our own notions onto it. Um, but anyway, I digress. So we have Amber here in Holland, and they are sitting on the beach here. Okay, so Holland gets up, walks to the house. Amber is still sitting here, and that's it. So I don't quite know what to make of that. But we have a post here, model of the island, posted on April 4th, 1999 by Frank Arper. Frank has a picture of a kitty cat as their profile picture, and they joined in March of '99. They have 55 posts, so they're relatively active. Okay, so Frank Arper says, "This is for my son's island project for first grade, which took second place in the contest. I'm proud of him. Okay, I will admit he played he mostly played Pajama Sam while Mom and I built the island, but he did the written part of the assignment himself. Anyway, here are the photos." I'll just remind you again that I can't really click on anything. It's kind of just a slideshow. So that's how this short story works. It's not like a dynamic hypertextual thing. It's a straightforward chronological narrative. So a user, Tipo, says, "That's adorable." This user Bustard, we've seen before, but Bustard is mostly kind of, you know, they don't make a lot of noise. They don't try to rile people up. Bustard says, "Glad your son's school is teaching him about islands." I'll just make note of the fact that Bustard in their footer says, "Yes, my avatar is trash cans. What of it?" Um, this user, Chris, says, "Your living room is disgusting." So I assume that's referring to one of the pictures that was posted when you click the link. Another user says, "LOL." And then Pat Lawler chimes in. "You did a good job with the island. I have some advice. You should not do your son's work for him. Do not let him get used to the idea that you will do his assignments. Take it from a fellow parent." Okay, so Pat Lawler is kind of giving some details there. So we know that Pat is a parent. Interesting. And what what do you take away from this? I mean, this kind of lends credence to what I've been saying about PLawler, that they're kind of conservative minded in certain ways. Not that it's like necessarily uh, like we don't have to use binary logic here and say that like doing your kids' homework for them is liberal, and not disallowing that and making the kid do their own homework is conservative. I think that's too simplistic, but it's sort of um, the tone with which P. Lawler makes these assertions. "I have some advice. You should not do your son's work for him. Do not let him get used to the idea that you will do his assignments. Take it from a fellow parent," with a smiley face. This is sort of like this is very a very passive aggressive, almost Midwestern coded type of person. This is how people in the Midwest talk to each other to some degree. It might be uh, a little bit too conflictual, um, but it's a very passive aggressive remark. The insinuation is, of course, that if you if you just do your kids' work for them, how are they ever gonna, become a productive member of society? It's very like very much in the spirit of the Puritan work ethic, right? So this already seems to be a recurring motif with P. Lawler because before they were casting judgment on Amber, who's a character in a screensaver, mind you, um, ostensibly, right? P. Lawler is supposedly a real person who's talking about a character in a screensaver and saying, well, Amber is, you know, I get frustrated with her because, she's just like, she's never doing anything. She's always just like lazing about, not doing anything. And I want to tell her that you're young, you should be doing stuff. It's very, it's very like in the spirit of the Puritan work ethic, I think. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what you think of that theory as the story unfolds. So Frank Arper responds and says, "Thanks, appreciated, but they were expecting parents to help with this one. You should see what the other kids brought in. Anyway, he did the written part, as I said." So, not overly defensive, but just kind of stating, it was expected that the parents would help out a little bit. Buddy chimes in and says, "My son doesn't like 3D Workers Island one bit. It scares him and he makes me turn it off." So, I don't know, maybe that kid's on to something. Okay, so now this user Jomson chimes in, and I just want to call attention to Jomson. I think Jomson is going to come up again, if I remember correctly. So I'm just going to make note of this. And let's also call attention to the fact that Jomson in their footer has a link to Jomson Systems. So that would seem to indicate that Jomson is a maybe a small business owner of some kind. Yeah, I don't know what Jomson Systems is, but it sounds like it sounds like they might, sell technical equipment. Um, they might offer services in terms of like running servers and stuff. Who knows? But that's something to keep in mind. And Jomson joined February 1st, 1999, and they've posted 99 times, so they're pretty active. So what does Jomson have to say? "Kids are afraid of everything. My wife and I rented a tape of The Page Master to watch with her niece, and unfortunately, we got to the moment where Macaulay Culkin's in the library and gets overtaken and drowned in the rivers of paint. And suddenly the tape went nuts and became unreadable. Her niece started screaming. Now she's afraid of getting drowned in paint and turning into a cartoon. I don't blame people who made that movie for making a terrified Macaulay Culkin character get drowned in paint, but some kids really do think it's possible to get swallowed up in a cartoon prison where they can't escape. And hell, if I believed that, I'd be afraid too." So this is interesting. especially when you consider the if we're reading this story in a kind of metatextual way, as in the sense that it functions to some degree as a meta commentary on the way Petscop was perceived, then this comment in particular becomes pretty interesting. And I'll just read it again. My wife and I rented a tape of The Page Master to watch with her niece, and unfortunately, we got to the moment where Macaulay Culkin's in the library and gets overtaken and drowned in rivers of paint, and suddenly the tape went nuts and became unreadable. So this is very upsetting to the niece, and she believes that it's real, right? Um, and I mean, do we? So if we're gonna go there, I feel like we might as well go there. But like thinking about this as a meta commentary on Petscop, it draws it inevitably seems like a parallel to the whole Candace Newmaker thing. I mean, it seems like possibly when you consider it in the context of how all these different users discuss the occurrences, the things that happen in this screensaver, how all these different people and their different backgrounds and their own subjective experiences with the screensaver, and how that's reflected in what they have to say about it, right? So because previously we had someone who was like I think it was 13 Point Studios. They were interested in the screensaver from a technical standpoint, and which makes sense because they were an aspiring game developer, right? So I'm sure there were plenty of people who were interested in Petscop um, simply from a technical standpoint, right? And then but there was also somebody using it to pacify their mother, right? Um, they would just put it on a projector screen, have the screensaver, just let it run, and it would sort of their mother would use it as a sort of it had a sort of escapist function, right? And so we see all these different people bringing their own sort of baggage and their own sort of the way their background and what they're bringing to it is reflected in the discourse, right? So now we get another person who says, my son doesn't like 3D Workers Island. It scares him and he makes me turn it off, right? And um, that alone is not, you don't really have much to go on, right? But this person, Jomson, is making a connection and saying, oh, perhaps, I mean, I wish I wish it were the case that people wouldn't take things too seriously, um, and start to believe that it's real. Um, I don't blame the people who made that movie for making a terrified Macaulay Culkin character get drowned in paint, but some kids really do think it's possible to get swallowed up in a cartoon prison where they can't escape. And hell, if I believe that, I'd be afraid too. So it's sort of, I mean, it seems to me that like there's this recurring sort of issue I have with the way media is discussed. And I've always taken the position that if there's something that's you think is inappropriate or something that you don't like, don't watch it, right? Um, and if there's something that is on TV and you don't want your kids to watch it, you shouldn't. You should just watch your kids, watch your fucking kids, and um, don't don't blame other people and don't try to get the show canceled because you don't like it, right? Um, and that's sort of like that sort of thread. If you pull on it, I mean, it's kind of analogous to the scenario where, um, obviously, okay, there were a bunch of references to this real world situation in Petscop, right? And certain people, I'm not going to say who, certain people um, kind of extrapolated a bit too much from that and tried to argue that Petscop was all about this real world situation, and you could look through this, it's this particular lens, and it's this one particular real world event is the key to understanding Petscop. And there's several problems with that, right? Um, the first is that it's simply not like that's not a good interpretation of Petscop. Um, that's number one. So, because the real world event is simply a thing that Petscop references from time to time and makes allusions. Um, and just because it made allusions to this thing doesn't mean that it's the key to understanding it. It's just one, it's just like one of many illusions, I think. Sorry, my throat is getting dry. Um, and so that's the first problem, is that that interpretation is reductive and kind of shallow. Number two, the second problem is this is a real thing that happened and somebody was actually harmed. Uh, somebody died, right? And so that should be discussed with the appropriate amount of respect, I think. And when the issue is when you try to make it all about this one event that actually occurred in which an innocent person died, that's kind of you're making it seem as though Petscop is disrespectful to the dead, when I don't think that's the case. Um, there is certainly a way that you could take that event and dramatize it that would be disrespectful. Um, but the mere act of making an allusion to something like that is not inherently bad, I don't think, and it's not inherently disrespectful. It's the way that you it's really the way you if you can pull it off or not is has to do with how that subject matter is treated. Is it treated with respect, or is it treated as a sort of um, is it simply there for shock value? And obviously, in the case of Petscop, I don't think that's the case. I don't think so. But that's what happens when you try to assert that a complex work like Petscop is all about this one real world event. Then what you're kind of doing is you're kind of lending credence to the idea that it is disrespectful to treat it in this way. Um, so there's like a tension there. Um, and so, I mean, it's entirely possible that I'm reading too much into this, but given the fact that the forum is a central part of this short story, and the way that these forum users talk about the screensaver seems like a pretty thematically important component of the work. This sort of like multiplicity of voices talking about things that they're observing. Um, yeah, there. I cannot help but to think this is meta commentary on the way Pat Scott was talked about and the way it was understood by the broader public, um, which is something that's that is really clever. I think it's a clever thing to do. Yeah. Um, I don't blame the people who made that movie for making a terrified Macaulay Culkin character get drowned in paint. So it's kind of like in this case, the meta commentary is like, hey, don't blame me, the creator. But I would be upset too, if I actually thought this was the case. I don't know. You got to tread lightly when you're talking about like what, intentionality or anything like that. But um, that is where my mind is. That's where I find myself going here. We have hardly gotten through any of this. Um, so we got a carton of eggs here. It's another scene from the screensaver. Okay, yes, and so we see Amber and Pat. I was going to say Pat Lawler, but that's only an implicit. That's an implicit connection. That is not something that is explicitly stated. But the character Pat and Amber behind the house here, we cannot see what's going on. We see Amber sitting down and Pat standing there, and that's it. So who's to say what is going on there? It's difficult to it's you don't really have anything to go on. But yeah. So here's another post, and this is where things start to get interesting. Um, so the topic this thread is titled "I installed 3DWI on my school's computers." This was posted on April 2nd. GoodKid joined the forum on March 15th, the Ides of March, and they only have 9 posts, so they're not terribly active, but they've only been on the forum for a couple of weeks. Okay, and it's important to note that GoodKid is a banned user. We have no idea why, but GoodKid has been banned. And another thing to note in the footer here, GoodKid says, "Forgive me, I don't know anything. I'm just a 14-year-old teenage kid." Smiley face. So that seems kind of cheeky. Um, and okay, so here we go. This happened back in October. In detention, they had me sit in the computer lab where I ostensibly wasn't allowed to play on the computers. LOL. But my computer lab teacher was in their upgrading office, and I showed him 3DWI and explained it to him. I swear he was like enchanted by it. He wanted to install it on all the computers, so we installed it on all the computers together while eating donut holes. We had some problems, and I had to call my sweet and angelic mommy to tell her why I was still at school, but we eventually got it working after 7 p.m. We turned off the lights and started we turned off the lights and started it going on every computer in the room. It was a powerful experience, just all these different things happening on the island all around us on glowing screens in the dark and silent computer lab at night. Way better than 3D pipes. I- It felt like this was the way 3D WI was meant to be experienced. I recommend putting this thing on as many screens as you possibly can. Yeah, something strange is going on here, obviously. um, especially considering this user, GoodKid, has been banned. Let's make note of the fact that their profile picture is just a red box. Um, I want to index something that I think is worth mentioning. It seems to me, and perhaps I'll be vindicated later on as we go through this. If I remember correctly, I've read this a few times at this point, but it seems to me that the central thrust of most of the discourse is aimed at keeping the screensaver running and and running on as many instances as possible. So kind of propagating the screensaver. That's what the discourse seems to be focused on, regardless of who's talking. Um, Granted, there are a handful of somewhat naive individuals who are like, I don't see what the big deal is about this screensaver. And then this other user is like, um, my son doesn't like this screensaver. He wants me to turn it off. But those people are um, summarily rebuked by other people in the community for various reasons. Um, but regardless of their rationale, they all seem to. It's a weird coincidence that they all seem to agree that you should download the screensaver and you should watch it and you should keep it running all the time. And you should download it on as many computers as you can, and you should keep it running at all times. So what does that sound like? I'll leave that question open for now. But I would like to index that thought, and I'm just going to write that down because I don't think I emphasize it enough in my analysis. So yeah, rationale always seems to support propagation of screensaver. Hopefully that's enough so that future me knows what I'm talking about. Get a little sneak peek into my uh, process, Yeah, turns out I just write things down randomly. Um, okay. Okay, so this is a pertinent question. Another user asks, "What were you in detention for?" GoodKid responds, says, "LOL, dress code violations mainly. I also invented a fake skin disease called uh, Kukilakune. Kutilakune. I think that's how you say that. Kutilakune. Okay. I also invented a fake skin disease called Kutilakune, and I started incorporating it into some of my written assignments in English and history, even though it had nothing to do with anything. Okay, this kid is actually pretty awesome. That is hilarious. Uh, yeah, okay. Joycey22100 responds, okay, I'll bite. Tell me about Kutilakune. Okay, so we're going to learn about this fake skin disorder. I'm glad you asked. Kutilakune, skin disease with 4 stages. Stage 0, redness and sensitivity. Stage 1, skin gaps, holes or gaps of various sizes exposing dermis. Stage 2, skin islands, widespread loss of epidermis, leaving only a number of skin islands of various sizes. Okay, so if you're following along at home, you're just he's just describing someone whose like skin is falling off. uh, yeah, not not a fun thing to think about. Uh, Stage 3, recession of the islands, leading to complete loss of epidermis. So their skin is completely fallen off. Early stages can be treated and reversed, but stage 3 is irreversible. Stages 1, 2, and 3 are consistently rated 10 on the 1 to 10 pain scale. Screaming and hair pulling and despair. So that's a lovely thought there. Um, I have a very specific reading of Kutilakune and the way it functions in the work. I don't know if I have the cognitive faculties at this time to fully explain my theory about what exactly is going on here. Um, but I will. Here's what I'll say for now. I think Kutilakune, the skin disease, and the way that the process is described, the sort of stagist understanding of the disease as a sort of progressive loss of skin. This is something we need to keep in mind with respect to the structure of the story itself. Okay? We're gradually peeling away the skin and uncovering something. And this process, whereby at first there's skin gaps, holes of various sizes exposing the dermis, gradual loss of the epidermis, this process by which the skin comes off, mirrors something that happens in the screensaver. So that's what I'll have. That's what I have to say for now. So we have another scene here. We got Pat. Oh, excuse me. We have Pat and we have Holland. Holland is, well, the doll is nearby. We don't know what Holland is doing. Holland is just sitting there. And there's a wheelbarrow back here. I don't know if you spotted it. It's easy to miss, but there is a wheelbarrow back here, and it's unclear if somebody's back there. But here is Amber, and there's something red in the wheelbarrow. Amber comes down, and we have these red objects. You know, if I would you would be it would be entirely reasonable to assume these are apples, right? But we can't make that assumption. We don't really know. They're red objects in a wheelbarrow. And that's about all there is to that scene. So we got Joycey here asking, who's your favorite character? Weird tall guy says Amber. Cheer says, no question, Amber. This other person, Reality Priest is a character that is going to uh, come up again. So Reality Priest posts a picture of Amber and says, Amber's the answer. This other character, sax player, says, if I had to choose a favorite, tough one. Just kidding, it's Amber. Fuck everyone else. So you would, I mean, if you're following along at home, it's entirely fair at this point to be very confused as to why everybody is saying Amber, because everything we've seen on the island thus far is really open to interpretation, and it's hard to say exactly what, if anything, is happening. If there is some kind of cohesive narrative going on, totally unclear. In fact, the evidence is to the contrary. It just seems to be random for the most part. So it is confusing that all of these different users seem to agree that Amber is their favorite character. Ned Hucker says, and Ned Hucker is a character that we have, a user that we have seen before. Ned Hucker says, I'm offended that the question is even being posed, but I understand you don't know any better. You're better off this way. So that is very ominous. Reality Priest says, I know we're not supposed to talk about those topics here, but can we at least be honest when it comes to questions like this? I'm not going to pretend my favorite character is Holland or Grace or somebody else just so things can stay clean on this forum. This other person goes, can somebody fill me in on the joke here? What's wrong with the other characters? Entirely fair question. Okay, so PLawler chimes in, and here's what Pat Lawler has to say. Amber would be a good choice, and may have been mine, but I am sometimes put off by her lazy tendencies. Naturally, I would choose Pat, since by coincidence we share a name, and I believe the two children are hers. Another coincidence, as I also have two daughters. However, I cannot help but feel attracted to Rebecca with her eye-catching red hair and shoes. It is a difficult question. So that's pretty funny. So here again, we have PLawler shaming this character Amber for being lazy, and we have seen no evidence of that. There is absolutely no evidence in the various scenes that we've observed thus far of Amber exhibiting laziness. So I think one would be fair to say that some level of projection is going on here. Also, completely bizarre to say that, oh, well, it's a total coincidence that my name is also Pat, and Pat just so happens to be the administrator of this website that's all about this screensaver. And there's a character named Pat in the screensaver, and not only that, but also here a picture of Pat is included as PLawler's profile picture. So the parallels are starting to kind of stack up in the direction of, yeah, Pat in the screensaver is at the very least a representation in some way of Pat Lawler. We don't know how, we don't know what that means exactly, but it's undeniable at this point that the work seems to be suggesting this, right? Um, and it's also telling that, oh, PLawler can't seem to decide who her favorite character is. Um, I would naturally choose Pat, but also they feel attracted to Rebecca. It's a difficult question. So in the midst of this discourse, which seems to be going in a very strange direction, with everybody saying their favorite character is Amber, Pat Lawler chimes in and says, well, actually, my favorite character is either Pat or Rebecca. And we know that P. Lawler is uh, the administrator of this website and has like authoritative control over what people are allowed to say. We can see another user here says Amber motherfucker. So now we get a wide shot of the island. And I believe that's the first time this has happened. But we can see that Holland and Amber are, they're standing over here on the beach, and that Grace is over here, um, separated from them. So again, we see Grace is kind of isolated. So it looks like Holland is going up to the water, maybe playing in the water a little bit. And then Holland goes towards the house and into the house, leaving Amber here standing on the beach. Amber is looking in the water. Hard to say. It's difficult to say exactly what she's doing. So this is a whole thing here. Uh, um, and this is a very nice touch, I think, because um, including other websites and something that is seemingly unrelated, but I don't think it is. I think it is related. Um, so because this is a whole thing here that we need to discuss in its own dedicated video, I think I'm going to leave things there. Um, so in the next installment of our 3D Workers Island read through, we are going to discuss Computer Philosophy 1, Windows. So that, I guess that's a teaser for the next video. um, I assure you, this is a whole thing here. So um, I guess I'll leave you there, and um, hopefully, I don't know. Let me know what you think. If you think I'm on the right track, or if you think I'm like kind of reading too much into things. It's entirely possible I'm over interpreting some of the uh, meta commentary that's going on. Entirely possible at this stage. Obviously, I dedicated a lot of time to Petscop. And when you dedicate a lot of time to something and analyzing it, it's really easy to kind of get too attached to your own interpretation, and then you start cherry picking evidence to try to support the narrative that you're trying to present. Um, so when you consider that element of it, with the fact that, obviously because I spent so much time um, dedicated to trying to analyze Petscop, I have an emotional attachment to it in some ways. And so it would not be entirely surprising if I kind of came into this trying to sort of I don't know, with that sort of coming into it with that sort of background, it would be easy for me to kind of read into things a little bit too much. But I think that's ironically also something the work is commenting on, is people like reading too much into things. It's hard to say. Maybe we'll figure it out. I don't know. I'll leave you there. Have a good night.